Good morning or afternoon or night. I don't know when you're watching this. This is Notes 41A, Becoming a World Power, the Pressure to Expand. You can see this good icon here. You might think it's a big eagle with its wings over the world. That face looks almost a little more like a vulture than an eagle. So let's talk about it. So America, as we've talked about, has had an economic boom. The industrialization that has gone through, the rapid urbanization, in an immensely short amount of time, America has become an actual contender on the world stage of industrialized nations. And it's wanting to become this world power. It has the economy, it has the production to back it up, but it doesn't have what some of the other world powers at the time have. And what they have are empires. So imperialism, the basic definition is here on the screen. Stronger nations dominate and control weaker ones to create an empire. When you just conquer an area and take it over and that's part of your country now, that's like conquering and annexing. When you have an empire, you basically let them control themselves, but you're going to get their tax money, you're going to get their tributes. And some of the famous empires throughout history, the Roman Empire, pictured here, the Mongolian Empire, not pictured here, but the biggest landlocked empire the world has ever seen, covered the most square miles if you didn't go across water. That's going to matter in a minute. The Ottoman Empire, which we'll discuss when we hit World War I next, the second half of this, and the British Empire. And in case you're wondering why I made sure to say that the Mongolian Empire is the biggest landlocked empire, that's because the British Empire takes the crown for the largest empire that has ever existed. It crossed oceans. The quote, "The sun never sets on the British Empire," was meant in two ways. One, the British Empire would never fall. And it mostly has. There's not much of a British Empire left in 2020. But the other one was much more literal. If you took sort of a globe, like that one, and you positioned it anywhere facing the sun, at any, spin the globe, stop it at any point, there would be some part of the British Empire in the daytime with the sun on it. So the sun, and actually because of a few tiny little island territories they have in a couple of the oceans, that's still true. At any point, the sun is shining on some part of the British Empire. So as far as importance goes, the British Empire is pretty much come and gone. But literally, the sun still never sets on the British Empire. And all the red is what you're looking at. It's more pink on this map, but you get the idea. That was all British at one point. So why imperialism? Why conquer a bunch of other territories? Why go through all the effort? Why go through the military effort? Why go through the everything else? Well, in the industrialized world, now that we have factories and automated machinery and machine guns and stuff like that, there's a few reasons that countries would want an empire. There are some benefits you could get from it. First of all, the economic factors. If you are an industrialized nation, you are making things, and to make those things, you need raw or natural resources. And most of these countries have used theirs up. England has cut down most of its forests. It has mined most of its own iron. It needs to go find timber and iron and coal from other places. And Germany, France are kind of in a similar boat. There's the nationalistic factors, feelings of that national superiority, that idea. For those of you with siblings or very close cousins that are basically siblings, you've probably been through that on one side of it or the other, right? Wait a minute, why did they get one and I don't? Except in terms of countries and nations. My brother got a car when he turned 16 and I didn't, and that's not fair. Well, England's got an empire, I want an empire too. Nationalistic factors. There's just the military reality. Navies are a huge part of militaries in the late 1800s, early 1900s, all the way till 2020. Honestly, navies are a big part of any modern military. And if you want a navy, you need a place to refill and refuel. And the best places for those are like islands, which are great well, the islands wouldn't consider it this way, but the big powers consider islands to be wonderful imperial targets. And then there's the humanitarian factors. These Western civilizations, England, France, Germany, America, Spain, a few others, Belgium, the Netherlands, they believed that that it was their duty to spread their sort of Western civilization, their culture and their law and their religion to these other countries. And you might be thinking, well, what's so bad about that? Remember Germany was on that list? Now, we're not at World War II and the Nazis yet, but like, what happens when the Nazis want to spread their culture and their law and their religion? Nothing good. Nothing good. So the question here, and when we're in class live, you'll have the pair deck. Otherwise, you can kind of just write this down in your notes, or if you're keeping a journal, that's fine too. Here's a question. What about that humanitarian factor? How do you think these civilizations felt about us spreading our culture, our law, and our religion to them, usually by force, like 9 times out of 10, like more than 9 times, like 99% of the time. We forced them to take our culture, we forced them to take our religion, we forced them to take our law, and all the rest. Now you might say, well, some of our stuff that we helped them with was good. What about modern medicine? Yeah, modern medicine's pretty great. Good job. Is it worth most of your island getting killed or put to work on these plantations and farms and stuff? I don't know. So this would be a good time to pause, think about this for a second, write down your answer, moving on. Yeah, feel free to pause, rewind, whatever you need to do. So let's rewind a little bit. Remember, we're in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that same progressive era time period we've been talking about. Now we're just going to talk about the foreign policy aspects of it. So we're going to rewind a bit to 1796. George Washington has been president for, almost basically 8 years now. And this is when he decided he was going to step down, right? 8 years is enough. I'm going to step down. We don't need a president for life. We just fought a war against a king. And in this farewell address, he talks to Americans about a lot of things. And when we get to the things that he talks about in other areas of history, we'll talk about that. But right here, we're talking about foreign policy. So let's see what he had to say about foreign policy. Stay away from permanent foreign policy is basically what he thought. Do not get into long-term alliances. Do not get into foreign conflicts that are going to drag America in when it has nothing to do with America. That's a really bad idea if you're a brand new country that takes up a small part of the northeast of the current U.S., and there's no guarantee England isn't going to try and reconquer you in the very near future. So that was George Washington's advice. Stay out of it. Now, if there's something you need to kind of like handle for a little bit, get involved with temporarily, that's fine. Stay away from the permanent alliances. And this is basically how America ran for like the next 100 years. And part of that next 100 years is the President James Monroe. In the 1820s, this is after the War of 1812, 1820s, America basically decided they were anti-imperialist. No empire for us, please and thank you. We have seen firsthand the evils of the British Empire, and we want no part of that. And so James Monroe put out what he called the Monroe Doctrine, and it was a document, you can go and read it if you want, but basically it says America is going to handle problems in the Western Hemisphere. If you're a country in Europe, the Eastern Hemisphere, you're welcome to come visit. You can bring trade, because of course with America we're gonna let trade in, right? We're gonna make that money, but no guns. Leave your guns at home, and that counts for South America too. Europe, stay out of South America. And in return for you not messing with our side of the world, we won't mess with your side of the world. Now, 1820 was 8 years after the War of 1812, where Canada burned down the White House. It was part of the British Empire, still wasn't actually Canada, but that's still fun to say. Where Canada basically burns down the White House. So it's 8 years after that. Most of the countries in Europe are like, yeah, that's cute. It's like if a little sibling is like, stay out of my room or else, and you're like, or else what? Well, if you stay out of my room, I'll stay out of your room. And it's like, you can't keep me out of your room, and I can keep you out of my room. That was kind of the Europe-America sort of relationship. Europe was like, you can't stop us from messing with South America, and if you try to come mess with us, you can't. So in the 1820s, the Monroe Doctrine wasn't really seen as a very important document, but Americans thought it was a good, strong thing to say and a good policy. Followed in the footsteps of Washington. Now, that isn't to say that we didn't expand our country a bit. We talked a lot about this in 8th grade U.S. history. Manifest destiny, right? So you have the painting of Columbia, the sort of goddess figure of America, sort of the symbol of America back in the day. These days we have like Uncle Sam and the Statue of Liberty. This is before the Statue of Liberty, so we have sort of Lady Columbia. And she's traveling out west in the east where the Americans already are. It's nice and civilized and bright. And out west it's dark and scary and spooky. Obviously you don't need to drag anything. The Pear Deck's not open right now. But in your notes, if you kind of like think about where you'd put the blue flag, where you'd put the green star, that'd be good. And remember, manifest destiny, the whole idea is that God wants America to go from sea to shining sea, the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. That was sort of the idea of manifest destiny. So what about further than the Pacific Ocean? What happens when we complete manifest destiny, right? What do we do next? Now, plenty of Americans were anti-imperialist, and they thought, well, once we complete manifest destiny, that's America, that's where we're at. We'll continue to follow George Washington's advice and not get involved in other countries' messes. We'll be open to trade and making that money, but we're not going to get involved unless we are directly involved. There were disagreements. There were folks that are starting to disagree, right? So we're talking, about 100 years after George Washington steps down from being president. There are Americans that are saying, maybe we should be getting involved in the world. We're a much stronger nation than we were back then. We have a much bigger economy. We should have a much bigger say in the affairs of the world. And the biggest voice arguing for this was Alfred Thayer Mahan, who wrote the book Influence of Sea Power Upon History, 1660 to 1783. This book, I don't know about in 2020, but certainly in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, was still being studied in various military schools in America as an important document, as an important book, as an important idea. And the basic idea of the influence of sea power upon history is if you want a serious empire, if you want to be, if you want a big boy empire, you need a big boy navy. And if you're going to have a big boy navy, you need like islands. You need to have refueling stations. Because his argument is you go back to the 1600s and no successful empire has existed since then without a big, strong navy. So these people that are thinking past the Pacific Ocean, past manifest destiny, are starting to think they need a big navy. Now another argument is the economic argument. You start seeing 1750s, the Industrial Revolution started in England, spread to Europe, spread quickly to America, and we are producing more and more and more things with our industrialized economies. You can see that the total industrialization is going up and up and up, and the dark blue America bit, sort of down at the bottom, is growing incredibly fast. And we're actually producing more things than Americans can buy. We are able to build more homes than Americans can live in. We're able to grow more food than Americans can eat. we're able to make more well, not cars yet, but you get the idea. We're able to make more things than we are able to buy ourselves. So we need to start selling to England. Well, England is manufacturing a whole ton of stuff. They don't need to buy American things. They have too many England things that they're making. Germany's got a similar problem. Russia, France, they kind of have similar problems. So we're able to sell things where we can, but we need new markets. And if we control a country or an island or part of a continent, we can force them to buy from us, which means more money for us. So the Pear Deck question here is, what is the basic economic argument being made in favor of expansion? Why is expansion good for our economic growth? What argument are they making? An example of this are what are called banana republics. So it's not just a store at the mall. It is a store at the mall, back when we had malls. Remember? All the way back then when malls existed? I guess they still exist, but don't go to the mall right now. Don't go to the mall right now. Bad idea. So a banana republic is an actual historical thing that happened in history. So a bunch of these American businesses are already very keyed into these Central American countries, some South American countries, some of the islands in the Caribbean, because that's a place where you can grow sugar, that's a place that you can grow pineapples, that's a place that you can grow bananas, other fruits that Americans love. So if you can grow a lot of these fruits and export them to America, you can make a lot of money. So the United Fruit Company, which was a U.S. company, basically went over and took over Costa Rica. Costa Rica had a government and it had citizens, but really the United Fruit Company was in charge. They had their own private army. If things got too bad, they would call up the Marines from the U.S. and be like, hey, come help us. We're Americans. And so basically, a lot of these Central American countries, some South American countries, don't really exist except as plantations for these fruit companies. And that's why they call them a banana republic. They're a country that their only purpose basically is to make money for American companies by growing bananas for them. And this is going to have even more consequences as we go forward. The amount of stars there are in the American flag. It's got a pretty direct consequence on that. Another argument being made is, well, maybe we don't need to expand, but we are a target and we will need to protect ourselves. So in the 1880s, so we're, progressive era, this is the time period we've been talking about. The US Navy is just low tier, not good. The European navies are far superior to the US Navy. And if you're Alfred Thayer Mahan, or if you've read his book, then you know, or at least you believe, that if you want a big, strong, modern country, you need a big, strong, modern navy at the very least to protect it. Now, not only could you protect yourselves with this big, strong navy, you could go conquer other places. You could take over islands, build naval bases on those islands so you can refuel your ships. One of the most famous ones of those naval bases where we refuel our ships at is Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. That name's going to come back in Unit 5. Don't worry, we'll get back to it. So in your notebook, in class we'll do the Pear Deck, but in your notebook, think about this. George Washington, fan of this idea of a giant navy that is going to be able to go around the world? 1 to 10, 1 he totally hates it, 10 he's totally down with the idea. Where do you think George Washington is? 1 to 10. Put that in your journal, put that in your notes, and think about that. So some new frontiers. Again, we closed the frontier, right? We did it. We did manifest destiny. We got it. We got Texas, we got California, we got all the rest. So now what, right? There's this energy, there's this passion, there's, part of the American mythology is the cowboy on the frontier. right? Like, I mean, even Star Trek, every episode starts with space, the final frontier. That is an American way of thinking, that there needs to be a frontier. And so we conquered our frontier, and we don't have spaceships yet. So, like, now what? And this is now what? We'll talk about the social Darwin aspect in a minute. Don't worry. But there's our boy Teddy Roosevelt in a painting. He's got that flag blowing. The wind is nice. He's on the boat. There's a ton of boats behind him. That is the image Teddy Roosevelt wanted for America, this projection of strength, of looking forward, right? You can look at that painting and see the America that Teddy Roosevelt wants. And this is how he's going to get it. Yeah, so remember that whole eugenics thing we did where, like, the progressives thought that you could, like, rank races and, like, it was all just trash and nonsense and the worst and super racist. This applies to imperialism too. And the idea that Americans had for this, the British had this idea too, the Germans had this idea, but the Americans, like, really latched onto this idea of the white man's burden, right? These Americans believed that not only was it, like, a good economic idea, and gosh, wouldn't it be nice to have a strong Navy kind of idea, but it was their duty, in some cases their religious duty, to spread modern civilization and Christianity to these savages, to these primitive tribes, to these heathens. Heathen's a fancy word for you're not part of my religion and you should be. Yeah, so they believed it was like their duty, like this was their job as human beings. And then we talked about the intellectuals at the time believing in eugenics, basically, right? Certain racial and national groups were biologically superior to others. That's a solid definition of eugenics. Not genetics. Genetics is real. Eugenics is nonsense. But we talked all about that. We're not going to get too deep into it. Oh, except I guess we are. Okay, we're going to get into it. Okay. So Rudyard Kipling, a very famous poet at the time, he believed that the white people were the supreme race, and we are the noble people sharing our superiorness with the world. And so he writes this poem. This is part of the poem. It's a bit longer than this, but on the Pear Deck, people are gonna be able to drag stuff to, like, things they like in this poem, things they don't like in this poem, and things they're like, I don't know. Just kind of like in your notes, in your journal, just kind of think about this, right? And I'll go over it. Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness, unfluttered folk and wild, your new-caught, sullen peoples, half devil and half child. Take up the white man's burden, and reap his old reward, the blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of hosts ye humor, slowly toward the light. Why brought he us from bondage, our loved Egyptian night? I'm not going to get into all the symbolism there, but, like, let's just hit a couple of words. So and they were proud of this poem. A lot of people like this poem, like, a lot, even to this day. But if you kind of take it apart, you start to see sort of the, problematic elements would be a word for it. So right at the beginning, send forth the best ye breed. So, like, the white men are already, like, genetically superior. Thanks, Rudyard. Go bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' need. So we're, like, capturing people and capturing places because they need us to. Your new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. These are human beings they're talking about. He's talking about when, Britain and Germany and France went in to colonize Africa, when, Europeans colonized North America. These weren't human beings to Rudyard Kipling. They were half devil and half child. Anyway, you can find much better interpretations of this poem elsewhere, but that's the basics, right? This is a very good political cartoon. The white man's burden, clearly the person drawing it didn't believe Rudyard Kipling, because it certainly looks like it's the natives here that are carrying a large burden. You got Uncle Sam up front. Behind him, you've got sort of the bulldog Prime Minister of England. Behind him, you've got the it's either a Spanish conquistador type or like a Prussian military officer. Hard to tell. But yeah, so like clearly it's the indigenous people here that are really carrying the weight. That's the that's to this artist the reality of the white man's burden. And if you're like, well, gosh, I'm glad we don't think like that these days. We sometimes do, right? And sometimes it's with the best of intentions. We think we're helping, right? An example of this could be charities or church mission groups going to developing parts of the world and just like assuming they know better than the people that live there, and assuming that we know what they need better than they do, so we're just going to give them what we think they need and whatever. And if you're like, yeah, I don't know, but like what, like you got an example? Got a great example. Hippopotamus is, by the way, one of the most dangerous animals on earth. Do not mess with one. They are territorial, they are fast, they are strong. They can bite a person just about in half. So like, don't mess with hippos. So this is from a few years back. This Italian charity goes to this village in Africa, and they're like, we're going to teach you how to farm. And these Africans are like, we've been here a long time. If farming were a good idea, we would have been farming instead of hunting and gathering and getting food in other ways. Like, who do you think figured out farming in the first place? So these native Africans were like, okay, sure, teach us how to farm, Italians, why not? Knock yourselves out. And so these Italians very carefully are showing them, well, these are tomatoes, these are potatoes, these are other crops, and this is how you can use them, and this is how you plant them, and this is the time of year, and the soil, and the watering you need to do, and really got into it. In the African village, like, taking notes. And so they plant it, and the Italian organization is there, and they're watering the crops, and they're fertilizing the crops, and they're taking care of everything. And, the African village they're welcoming them in, and they're, enjoying each other's company, surely. It's not like these Italians are, like, mean. It's not like they're trying to, like, conquer these Africans. It's not like they're trying to, like, be jerks to them. They're trying to help. They think they're helping. But then before the fruit can, and the food can fully mature and be harvested, hippos ate it all. And the Italians were like, oh, that's why you don't farm this super good soil next to the river. And the Africans were like, yeah, because the hippos come and eat everything, and you don't mess with a hippo. So like, stuff like this doesn't need to be like some, bad people spouting racial slurs to be like a problem. All the money that was spent to send this Italian aid organization down and wasted on the crops and everything else they did, if they take it, it's not that they have to completely change their operation. If they just adjust it slightly, right? They still send the aid organization down there. They still send the people down there, but they contact the village and say, what do you need? We want to help you. How can we help you? And then they would just listen to that village, and then they could send the people down there, and they could help them, right? So it's not that these charities and these mission trips are like bad people doing bad things. They're well-intentioned. They're just not listening because they assume they know more. And they might know more about some things, but they don't know more about farming next to rivers in Africa. So that's the story. And these are the arguments that Americans use to expand more and more. So, spoiler alert, the pro-imperialists, the pro-expansion argument wins out big in America. Fast forward to 2020, we have military bases and naval bases in over 100 countries. We are basically considered like the world's police force. We spend more money on our Navy. Our Navy, if you stack up our Navy against any other Navy on Earth, we win. If you stack up our Navy against any two navies on Earth, we still win. And I'm going to fast forward to the end of this because it's going to take a while if I go one by one. If you take the US Navy against numbers, if you rank all the navies on Earth, US Navy's number 1. If you take navies 2 through 15, the next 14 navies, then maybe it's a fair fight. Maybe. So, pro-imperialist, pro-expansionist forces absolutely win out this argument. So we're going to talk more about that tomorrow. We're going to talk about the very beginning, the official beginning of the U.S. empire, which is the Spanish-American War, which Teddy Roosevelt plays a huge part in. We'll do that tomorrow. But your final thoughts for today, what do you think? Should America expand? Should we stay neutral? If we expand, why? So think about that. Final thoughts, sentence or two is plenty. It's not really for a grade, but like these are questions you're going to need to answer as a citizen of America when you vote, when you just be a good citizen. Like the country is what we make it. And what do you want? What do you want our country to be like? Think about it. See you tomorrow.